When Charles Goodyear died in 1860, he left behind more than grief. He left behind a debt of over $200,000, a crushing sum in the 19th century, equivalent to many millions today. Creditors circled. His family was exhausted. His body was worn down by illness and anxiety. He left this world believing he had failed the people he loved most. And yet, long after he was gone, his name would roll across highways, etched onto the sidewalls of tires that carried the modern world forward. It is one of history's sharpest ironies that the man who helped set the world in motion spent his life weighed down by poverty. He was not born to misery. In his early years, Goodyear showed promise as a hardware merchant, intelligent and ambitious, with the restless energy of a man who believed he was meant for something larger. But the America of the 1930s was unforgiving to businessmen who miscalculated. When the economy faltered and ventures failed, debt was not merely a financial inconvenience, it was a crime of circumstance. In 1830, Goodyear found himself confined in a debtor's prison in Philadelphia. His offense was not theft or fraud, it was failure. Prison did not break him. If anything, it sharpened his obsession. Even within the walls of confinement, he carried with him small pieces of raw rubber, experimenting, thinking, dreaming. At the time, rubber was both a marvel and a nuisance. Imported from tropical regions, natural rubber possessed fascinating elasticity, yet it was wildly unstable. In summer heat, it became sticky and foul-smelling, melting into useless gum. In winter cold, it hardened and cracked like brittle wood. Manufacturers were frustrated. Investors were skeptical. Most concluded the material was inherently flawed.
Goodyear disagreed. He believed the problem was not rubber itself, but humanity's incomplete understanding of it. After his release, he plunged headfirst into what became a lifelong battle with the substance. Friends watched in confusion as he sacrificed stability for experiments. Creditors grew impatient. His family endured constant uncertainty. He mixed rubber with magnesia. He treated it with nitric acid. He experimented with various powders and metals, even copper compounds, searching for a formula that would tame its wild nature. The fumes from his makeshift laboratories were often toxic. His clothes were perpetually stained. The stench clung to him. Yet he pressed on, driven not by profit alone, but by conviction. He was certain that somewhere within this stubborn material lay a transformation waiting to be unlocked. Poverty became his companion. He borrowed money repeatedly, only to lose it in further failed trials. He was imprisoned for debt more than once. With dark humor, he reportedly referred to jail as his hotel, a bitter acknowledgement that confinement had become a recurring chapter of his life. But even in prison, experiments continued. Rubber scraps shared space with iron bars. His mind refused to be locked away. Then came the moment that would define industrial history. In 1839, while working in Massachusetts, Goodyear was handling a mixture of rubber and sulfur. Accounts differ in small details, but the essential event remains consistent. A piece of this mixture was accidentally dropped onto a hot stove. Instead of melting into useless goo, the material charred slightly, yet retained its shape. When it cooled, it was not sticky, it was not brittle, it was resilient, flexible, and firm, like leather with memory.
Goodyear studied it in disbelief. Heat, combined with sulfur, had altered the internal structure of rubber. It no longer surrendered to temperature extremes. It had been stabilized. He refined the process tirelessly, experimenting with ratios and heat levels until he achieved consistent results. He named the process vulcanization, after Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. It was a poetic choice. Fire, which destroys, had instead perfected his material. What nature had left incomplete, heat had finished. The implications were enormous. Vulcanized rubber could withstand summer heat and winter cold. It could stretch and return to form. It could seal, cushion, protect, and endure. Industrial machinery, waterproof clothing, footwear, belts, hoses, entire sectors stood ready to be transformed. The age of rubber had begun. But discovery did not bring prosperity. While Goodyear pursued perfection in his formulas, his household crumbled under strain. He and his wife Clarissa had 12 children, yet tragedy visited them repeatedly. 6 of their children died, many during periods of severe financial hardship. Disease and malnutrition stalked families already weakened by poverty. There were moments so desperate that Goodyear lacked money for basic necessities. One painful story recounts that when a child died, he could not afford proper burial expenses and had to arrange matters himself with heartbreaking simplicity. Whether every detail has been embellished by time or not, the underlying truth remains: his family suffered deeply. Clarissa stood by him for years, enduring relocations, humiliation, and instability. Eventually, her health deteriorated. She contracted tuberculosis, the era's silent killer, and passed away before her husband. Her death marked another fracture in a life already splintered by loss. In 1844, Goodyear secured a patent for his vulcanization process in the United States. It should have been the turning point. Instead, it became the beginning of another exhausting war, this time in courtrooms rather than laboratories. Rubber was too valuable to ignore, and many manufacturers adopted his process without authorization. Patent enforcement in the 19th century was slow, costly, and uncertain. Goodyear filed lawsuits relentlessly. More than 30 legal battles followed. Some he won, some he lost. Even victories drained him financially, as legal fees consumed whatever modest royalties he managed to collect. He traveled to Europe to protect his patents abroad, only to encounter further complications. In France, he became entangled in debt yet again, and was briefly imprisoned there as well. And yet, in 1855, amid this swirl of hardship, the French government recognized his achievement. Emperor Napoleon III awarded him the Legion of Honor for his contribution to industry. It was a surreal contrast: a decorated inventor, honored for genius, confined because he could not satisfy creditors. Recognition without relief became the theme of his later years. Industries expanded using vulcanized rubber. Entrepreneurs prospered. Investors built factories. The world began to rely on the very process he had fought to perfect. But Goodyear himself struggled to convert innovation into stable wealth. He lacked the ruthlessness of certain industrial magnates. He reinvested heavily. He trusted unwisely. He was driven more by experimentation than by consolidation. His focus remained on refining and defending the process rather than building an empire around it. By the time illness overtook him, his body bore the cost of decades spent inhaling chemical fumes and living under relentless stress. In 1860, he traveled to see his dying daughter. Shortly after, he himself collapsed. When he died, the ledger told a cruel story. Enormous debts, few assets, and a family left to navigate the consequences. Yet history has a long memory. Decades later, in 1898, an entrepreneur named Frank Seiberling founded a tire company in Akron, Ohio. The bicycle craze had given way to the dawn of the automobile age. Demand for reliable rubber tires was soaring. Seiberling chose to name his new enterprise the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. It was not a business continuation. Charles Goodyear had no financial stake in it. His descendants did not receive royalties from the name. It was a tribute, a recognition that without vulcanization, modern tires would not exist. As automobiles multiplied across continents, as aircraft lifted from runways, as trucks carried goods across nations, the name Goodyear traveled with them. It appeared on racing circuits and city streets. It became synonymous with motion, endurance, and reliability. Ironically, the man who struggled to stay afloat financially became immortal through an industry built on the very material he stabilized. His story is not merely about rubber. It is about the cost of innovation in an age before safety nets, before structured research grants, before corporate laboratories absorbed risk. He lived at a time when invention required personal sacrifice, measured not only in money, but in health, dignity, and family security. He paid in all three.
There is a quiet power in his legacy. He did not command armies. He did not govern nations. He did not die wealthy. Instead, he altered the physical properties of a stubborn material, and in doing so, altered the trajectory of industrial civilization. Modern transportation, manufacturing belts, gaskets, insulation, waterproof gear, countless everyday objects trace their reliability back to the chemical transformation he discovered. And yet, if one imagines him at the end, tired, indebted, mourning lost children and a lost wife, it becomes clear that progress often rests on unseen shoulders. The world remembers outcomes. It rarely remembers the nights of doubt, the prison walls, the unpaid bills, the chemical burns, the funerals. Charles Goodyear believed in an idea when evidence mocked him. He saw potential where others saw inconvenience. He endured ridicule, litigation, confinement, and grief without surrendering the central conviction that rubber could be made useful to humanity. He never fully enjoyed the prosperity his discovery enabled, but the wheels that now carry millions forward turn in part because he refused to stop. His life stands as a paradox, a man burdened with debt who gave the world durability, a prisoner who unlocked industrial freedom, an inventor who died feeling unsuccessful, yet whose name would become one of the most recognized in modern industry. In the end, he did give the world wheels. He simply never rode in the comfort they would one day provide.